Kay Redfield Jamison recounted her long battle with manic depression in the 1996 bestseller, An Unquiet Mind. The New York Times called it, quote, an invaluable memoir, at once medically knowledgeable, deeply human, and beautifully written. Over the years, she has become widely regarded as a leading authority on the illness that almost took her life. She is professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Her current book, Night Falls Fast, Understanding Suicide, emphasizes the surge in suicide rates among the young. I am pleased to have her here to talk about this notion of suicide that she knows so well. Thank you for coming.
Delighted. Thank you.
I know a little bit about Unquiet Mind and the response you got. When we talked, you had not been on the book tour about this. What is it that people come up and want to say to you? Are they still talking about manic depression? Are they talking about the link between manic depression and suicide, which you're so eloquent about? Or are they simply because they've known someone that has been a suicide victim and they just want to touch someone that knows?
Well, it varies a lot. I mean, last night, for example, I was at Harvard, and there were about 500 students there. And many of them were very interested because they had thought about suicide themselves, or a parent had committed suicide, or someone they knew had committed suicide. And they were concerned about it. They wanted to learn about it. Some of it, they really wanted to learn about what suicide was all about. But a lot of it was personal, you know, that they were on medication for depression. Or they had a lot. I was amazed at the number of students who came up and said they actually had manic depression. But most of them that came up said they had depression or they had it in their families and they were concerned about it.
Give me some of the numbers that are overwhelming in terms of it is the fastest. Well,
it is the second killer of women aged 15 to 44 across the world. It's the fourth killer of men in that age group. It's the second killer of college students in the United States. It's the third killer of 19 to 24-year-olds. It is a major public health issue, and it's not talked about. And I think that's what's so damaging. With most illnesses that we know kill people, we talk about them. We don't talk about suicide.
Why not?
It's hard for me to know because I think people are actually interested in suicide as a phenomenon. You know, we have a kind of human interest in why would anyone do anything that dire and extreme.
Whenever it's about life and death, somehow it magnetizes and mesmerizes our attention.
Right, but somehow we haven't tied it to death enough, I think, to actually death statistics as a cause of mortality. There's a huge stigma. People are ashamed of suicide. They're ashamed of having suicide in their family. They feel responsible if someone has killed themselves. They feel as though somehow they ought to have been able to do something.
Why is that? Is it religious or is it something else?
I think because we're human and we think, you know, if only I had done something differently. And there's no evidence that that's true. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming that suicide is related to 5 or 6 major psychiatric illnesses. But people still feel responsible. And part of the reason I wrote my book is I don't want people to have to feel so responsible. I want society to feel responsible.
And to understand that there are medication and things that you can do to put a block between mental illness and suicide.
Right, medication and psychotherapy. And that there's a lot we as a society can do about informing people that this is a risk. And we should know about it in the same way we know about drug abuse or alcohol abuse or AIDS.
But young people, are most of them who commit suicide are victims of or
depression.
I'm not sure victim is the right word, but they suffer mental illness.
That's right. Depression, schizophrenia, manic depression. Those are the major causes in young people.
Manic depression by far the largest, or not?
No, depression, because depression is more common than manic depression. The depressive illnesses, sure, whether it's manic depression or depression, absolutely, the most common. But particularly combined with alcohol abuse.
Let me touch on a couple of things, because what is stunning to me, too, and that this is almost macabre, it is how people commit suicide.
Yes. The level of desperation in people, ingenuity, despair, and violence. I mean, suicide is often a very violent act, and the people who commit suicide very often have a very volatile and violent temperament, and that goes in sometimes to, it's not just gunshot, it's not just kind of jumping over a ledge, but, you know, people have done everything from drilling holes in their heads with electric drills to, stuffing turkey rumps down their throat to killing themselves on psychiatric wards with every conceivable means that you can imagine, electrocuting themselves. I mean, it's awful. People really, really want to die.
And is it an element of punishment here or not?
I don't think so. I think that's way overplayed. I think it's a level of despair. It's a level of wanting out. If you read suicide notes, aside from the kind of literary and eloquent ones, but if you just read most suicide notes, the most common thing that you read is, I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand the pain. And then after that, you see very kind of ordinary remarks like, take care of my dog, take care of my child, or whatever. But the element of pain is the overriding one.
Just can't endure in one more hour.
Right, and the level of pain is very difficult to describe. It's unendurable.
Most of us can't imagine the pain of mental illness.
Right. I think that's true. I think it's a very hard thing to empathize with. We think we can empathize with terminal cancer pain, and perhaps we can, perhaps we can't. I doubt actually that we
can't.
Can.
But it has a physical element that people
right
know
because
is there.
all of us have had physical pain, so we can imagine an extreme of that, perhaps, or we think we can. With psychiatric illnesses, the level of because what hits your head is hopelessness. You see no point. Nothing's going to change. It's bleak. It's black. You can't think. Your mind doesn't work. You've lost your mind. If you lose your mind and your ability to think and reason and care, there isn't much point in a way. I mean, you're not human. You're not who you were. You feel a burden. You feel just an agony. It's suffocating.
What percentage of people who attempt suicide want to succeed? I mean, is it 90%, or is it a cry for help? Sometimes
it's a cry for help. I mean, it always should be taken seriously because you don't know what it really signifies. Most people who attempt suicide are pretty serious about it. Some people obviously are more serious about it than others. A lot of people who don't die from suicide attempts, in fact, it's because they don't understand the drug that they've taken. Women, for example, tend to overestimate the deadliness of prescription drugs. They tend to underestimate the deadliness of guns. It's a strange thing.
It's amazing to me.
Yeah.
They think they can shoot themselves and it won't kill them.
Or it's less likely.
But if they take a bunch of pills, it's clearly going to kill them 7 times over.
People's views of what will kill them are pretty odd. They don't. I mean, there have been a series of studies looking at what pathologists know will kill people, and how different that is from what people actually think will kill them.
You attempted suicide.
Right.
And they've written about it.
Right.
Was it hard to include that? Or did you say, yes, it's hard, but I cannot not include it and be someone who pulls himself out as a trained clinician and an expert?
Well, given that I had written about my manic depression, right. Certainly. I mean, I had written for years about suicide and not said anything about my own attempt. And I think that people don't bring their divorces into writing about their psychiatric journal papers, or their science papers. If you write an article in Nature, you don't necessarily talk, and you write an oncology paper, you don't necessarily talk that your mother had breast cancer. I mean, your personal life needs to be left out. In this book, I felt very strongly.
I think if you wrote about breast cancer and you had breast cancer, that might be different.
Not necessarily. No, but I mean, people who write papers on all sorts of subjects. I mean, I know all sorts of people who are scientists who write about illnesses that they have or have in their families. And there's no particular reason for them to do it because their science is either replicated by other scientists or it's not. Mm-hmm. And it's not appropriate in a scientific journal. It's not a confessional booth. It's whatever. But in this book, I mean, I was writing about suicide, and I wanted to make it a book that was passionate and had my own stamp on it, as well as, I hope, good science. I wanted it to be what we know about the psychology and the biology of suicide, what we know about the horrible figures, what we know about public health aspects of it. But I also wanted it to have heart in it and the experience of other people. Yeah, for sure. Because I think I was writing about the agony of other people, and I also wanted to write about the agony of myself and how complicated it is. That I didn't blame anybody, for sure, for anything that happened to me. I mean,
in fact, you said in your note,
not
your fault, nobody's fault.
Absolutely not.
Bad illness.
Right, it's a bad illness. That's right. It's nobody else's responsibility. It's not my responsibility. You get an illness, it's a bad illness, and I wanted people to understand that.
But you thought it through before you did it.
I thought it very carefully through, and then
How long? A month, 2 months.
Well, I was suicidally depressed for much of 18 months. I had stopped my lithium, which a drug I respond very well to, and I had stopped it because I didn't think I needed it, and I was really, really wrong, here to say. And
as wrong as you've ever been about anything.
Absolutely. I mean, because it nearly cost me my life, and it cost me a lot of years of my life, for sure.
How many years did it cost you of your life?
Oh,
it didn't take you for how long?
Well, but the net effect, if you stop taking lithium or any kind of other medication, the longer your brain is in turmoil, the harder it is to get it sorted out again.
Yeah.
So it took a long time to get my brain sorted out again. I'm sure there's some that would argue that brains is not entirely sorted out yet, but whatever.
That's the nature of you. When your brain sorts itself out, what does it do? It gets to rewired or something?
It gets rewired. It gets stabilized. And quite literally, your moods get stabilized. Your
the chemical reactions began to take place in a normal manner.
Right. Instead of being completely chaotic, completely out of control. Right.
So you plan this.
I planned it.
Obviously, I know about this because I talked to you about it, but at a different place. You planned it. Right. Took the phone off the hook. Right. Put it in the other room.
Right.
Didn't unhook it. Didn't take it out of the jack or something.
No, because I knew that I had keepers, friends of mine who were on a quasi-suicide watch.
And?
I knew that if they called and they didn't get through
they'd come over.
They'd come over. So I figured this way I would buy myself some time, long enough to die, basically. I was sort of between segments of being watched. And my brother did call.
From Paris.
From Paris. And heard, I was obviously very incoherent and very bad slurred speech. Lithium's a very lethal drug.
You took lots of lithium.
I took a way over the necessary amount to die amount of lithium, right?
That wasn't good for your brain either.
I don't think it helped. No, I mean, as a matter of fact, I mean, I shouldn't joke. I mean, there are very good, real holes in my memory, and I don't remember things. Some of that's age now, but that was really dated to that suicide attempt. It was a very bad.
Do you know why you went and answered the phone?
No, I think when you're comatose or semi-comatose, you aren't thinking rationally. You aren't thinking like you are when you're conscious. And I think it's a very instinctive thing to do. It's very hard for me in general not to answer the phone. I mean, under any circumstance, there's a certain curiosity. It's like waiting for your Buck Rogers ring. Which never comes.
So you took the lithium,
right?
And way over anybody's.
Right. And I kept a lot of
way more than it should have caused you to die.
I took some other stuff I had around. I had some antidepressants that I had been prescribed before that I had squirreled away. And a lot of medicine to keep it down, to keep me from vomiting it up, that I got from an emergency room, and took it all.
Waited to die. Phone rings.
Phone rang sometime later. I mean, presumably quite a while later. I don't really know. I have no idea. I mean, time flies when you I have no idea. But, that whole... who knows? I mean, I was very, very sick, and I was kind of in and out of consciousness for many days afterwards. So it was not something that I remember with acuity. Thank God.
You survived. Why?
I survived because I got treated medically very quickly. I mean, relatively quickly, given the state I was in, and I had very good medical care. And
people knew about you.
Yeah. And my friends were doctors, and they kept watch on me. I mean, I have been very blessed in my friends. I mean, I hope I would never do that to my friends again, in the sense I would go in the hospital. But my friends knew the reality that if I were hospitalized, I would have lost my, hospital privileges and clinical license. And so everybody was doing as best they could to keep me out of the hospital. I regret that now for myself.
You were 99% sure that you would never stop taking your lithium again because of what happened to you, because you can remember, that slippery slope that you went down then.
Right, 100% certain.
100% sure.
Yeah, I have no ambivalence now anymore. That was like one trial learning. I absolutely, my psychiatrist used to say to me when I go on and off and I get manic and depressed, he'd say, don't you think you've run this particular experiment often enough to know the outcome? I actually finally got the outcome well enough to know that, I just can't. It's a lethal illness for me.
manic depression is a lethal illness, and the only way it is not lethal is that you have your medicine.
Right, for sure. And I had very good psychotherapy.
And in fact, that was important.
It was life-saving to me. I think one of the things that's unfortunate about managed care is because manic depression is such a clearly genetic illness and so clearly biologically based, is the assumption is that all you need to do is give pills to people. And for some people, that's enough. But for a lot of people, it isn't enough. And
managed care doesn't pay for therapy?
No, or minimally, no. And there's a tendency to think that you can just treat these illnesses.
Your point in writing this book is to help us understand suicide, number one. And there's nothing more important than understanding, one, that there is medication available for a lot of psychiatric illnesses.
Right, and that psychiatric illnesses are the major cause of suicide.
And they're the major cause, but there's medication available so that that link is not forced.
And treatments in general, and that there is...
Including psychotherapy.
Right. And that also that it's a big problem that we're not talking about. A lot of people are dying, a lot of young people are dying, and I think that the Surgeon General, David Satcher, has really taken this on as a major public health issue. And I think that's exactly what needs to be done. People are dying, and college kids are dying, poor people are dying, young African-American men are dying, 10 to 14-year-olds are dying, lots and lots of people dying, unnecessarily.
And it's hereditary.
Well, some aspects of suicide have a genetic component to them. Manic depression is very hereditary. Schizophrenia has a strong hereditary basis. Some forms of severe depression do. Not everything is hereditary, but biological, certainly the more biologically based, as it were, seem to have a more genetic component. It
stuns me, having met you, whenever I see a suicide story now, then I read about it and look for the fact that they're manic depression. But I saw the story the other day about an NFL player slashed his wrist.
Yes, right. Horrifying. Right.
Horrifying.
Yes. And who knows what he had? He certainly was acting in strange ways in addition to the self-destructive ways. And manic depression is just one part of it. I mean, depression, severe anxiety disorders, alcohol.
As noted earlier, Kay Redfield Jamison's previous book was An Unquiet Mind. This one is Understanding Suicide. Big title is Night Falls Fast. Night Falls Fast, Understanding Suicide. We'll be right back. Stay with us.